With Dr. Erika Navarro, because when you look at this thing on satellite, I think as meteorologists, we're in awe because you rarely get to see a hurricane this well formed and this strong.
This is certainly a sight to see in the Atlantic. We don't usually see these types of storms here, and that's because this is a record-setting storm. We've never seen a storm of this intensity in the Atlantic Ocean, outside the Gulf and the Caribbean. It's one of the strongest storms we've had here in the Atlantic Basin. Right now, things are okay. As you just saw from that camera, they're not looking too bad, but that's going to change very soon because this storm is starting to make its approach here to the Leeward Islands. That's going to be changing overnight because this system is disastrous. Looking at this is a perfectly well-formed, symmetric hurricane. That is a mark of a very strong storm here moving in. And if you look over the satellite imagery today, notice those pink colors become very circular and symmetric. That's scary forecast time, because again, that wind field has been broadening over the last couple of days. So those impacts are going to be felt far away from the center with a storm like this.
So in essence, in the last 24 hours, we've increased the intensity. The pressure has dropped, the winds have gone up, and the wind field has expanded. All things that you don't want to end up seeing here because it just exacerbates the potential damage it could cause.
Yeah, that's right. And unfortunately, what's unique about this system as well is those conditions are not forecast to change. It's going to remain in a moist environment. It's going to remain in a favorable upper level wind pattern, and it's not going to be interacting very much with the islands because it's sliding a little bit off to the north. So this storm is forecast to maintain that intensity over the next couple of days, which again is pretty terrifying because we're talking about impacts here not only from wind and rainfall, but also very high storm surge and waves in some areas.
Some islands may take a direct hit here, but we are forecasting a little bit of a north jog here. We're hoping to see that soon because that would end up sparing a place like Puerto Rico from the worst of the weather.
Yeah, that's right. That northward turn here is going to be very welcome to a lot of these places because notice here that storm starts sliding a little bit further upwards here of Puerto Rico. So they will still be seeing some fairly high waves here. This is the 15 to 20 foot range. Storm surge in this area may be up to 3 to 5 feet. So again, the coastal areas that are normally dry, likely going to be seeing some flooding. But notice how it continues to move further off to the north. So impacts here are not going to be as high potentially in Hispaniola, but we are still forecasting for some very high waves. But once this center of circulation heads towards the Bahamas, things are absolutely going to get worse. We're talking catastrophic levels of storm surge in this area.
And, a lot of times we talk about land impact on a hurricane and it can help, reduce its intensity. The Bahamas don't offer any real legitimate land mass to hit. So weakening is not likely to happen.
Not likely over the Bahamas, unfortunately. If this storm goes a little bit closer to Cuba, that could be different. Cuba has a lot of mountainous terrain, so that could weaken that circulation and bring it down, that intensity. But again, the impacts really are still going to be the same because this storm is very intense. So the magnitude here is still a lot of rainfall, up to a foot of rain, 12 to 18 inches potentially in some isolated areas, and that will continue along its path. We could be seeing 8 to 10 inches of rain in a lot of these places.
All right, so for Puerto Rico, a place like San Juan, walk us through this here short term. What happens?
All right, so San Juan, you can expect your impacts to begin tomorrow. This is Wednesday night to Thursday morning. 5 to 8 inches of rain is the forecast. Again, we could be seeing higher amounts than that based on how the wind and the rain interacts with the mountains. Storm surge along the coast could be up to 5 feet. So that, for example, is something you can expect. But if that storm goes a little bit further north, that would bring down the impacts here just even a little bit.
All right, we know that after the Caribbean islands, next comes potentially the United States. South. All right, we're asking you to throw your questions at us tonight, and hopefully you can do that. So Dr. Navarro is with us tonight to answer this question from Scott. Is there a correlation between the size of a hurricane's eye and wind speeds and barometric pressure? It's all interrelated.
It's all interrelated, and amazingly, it's a great question because we wanted to talk about some of the intensity changes that have gone on with this storm. The deeper the pressure in the center, the higher the winds in the eye wall of that storm. So again, there is absolutely a correlation here, and those stronger winds will be seen in a storm that has a very defined concentric eye wall. So let's take a look at an example of a storm here that's fairly small to start off in size. This is a rough estimate here. The eye might be 25 to 40 miles across. In this type of situation, if this is a fairly strong storm, this may begin to undergo a process called an eye wall replacement cycle. What happens happens in that case is you get really strong thunderstorms that form outside of the eye. Eventually, these storms get so big that they start choking off the inside of the storm from the environment that it's surrounded by. So these thunderstorms will continue to grow and remain stronger until you start to see a signature here of another secondary eye wall forming on the outside of that. Eventually, that inner one will die because those outer storms are choking it off from the environment. But what often happens in that case is that after a storm completes an eye wall replacement cycle, you get that outer wind field growing. So now the stronger winds have expanded. But the storm actually grows in size after it completes that cycle because that outer one will start to contract inward. And as that eye comes inward and starts to form really small again, we start seeing those wind speeds pick up, and often the storms are stronger after they complete
And we've
this
seen
cycle.
this happen with Irma.
We have seen it happen multiple times, I believe. It's at least once, if not twice. These major mature hurricanes, if they have an environment, all things else being equal, will often undergo multiple of these processes.
Let me ask you this. Is it forecastable? Is an eye wall replacement cycle forecastable?
This is a very interesting question. It's one I actually studied a lot in my dissertation. There are a lot of people working on that problem. There are a lot of things that we've seen that precede these types of cycles. The details of these are still coming together, but we know enough about how they play out in a storm that we can forecast in the very near term what we can expect. Because again, when you have a storm like this that's now completed, it's bigger. Sometimes this can lead to what's called an annular hurricane, where we have then a very big concentric eye wall, not unlike what Irma is looking like right now on the satellite imagery. And so with that, we know that if that eye wall replacement cycle is happening, often the wind speeds will come up afterwards because the storm is reorganizing itself, if you will. This is a very natural process that these mature hurricanes tend to do. They'll fluctuate a bit in intensity, but it's a mark of a very strong storm.
We have a very intense hurricane right now, 185-mile-per-hour winds. I'm sure people at home are then asking, could this go through another eye wall replacement cycle and conceivably get stronger than it is right now?
It's amazing to think. I mean, it's already 180 miles per hour. I can't imagine something stronger than that. But yes, it could go through another cycle. It's forecast to remain in these favorable conditions over the next 3 days. So we could likely see that process happening again, which would change the intensity forecast. So again, those details are important, but here's what I would say to take away. Because we're going through these processes and we're seeing the storm grow, the size here really matters, because now with Irma, with the hurricane force winds extend out about 60 miles. Those are the really strong winds. Outside of that now, we're talking 175 miles across of tropical storm force winds. So these processes really do matter because it broadens the wind fields and the impacts.
So that puts more people potentially at risk of winds.
That's right.
All right, Dr. Navarro, thank you. Now,